What is up, bros? Me Josh here. In today's video, we're going over the Tier 5 tech tree Russian battleship, the Pyotr Velikiy. Now, throughout this video, I know I'm going to slaughter that name. I probably did. I'm just going to call it the PV for short. So I apologize, future people in the comments that are going to correct me on how to say this. I will just call it the PV, so that's what I mean throughout this video. But the Tier 5 tech tree battleship is an absolute monster. But first of all, this thing is work in progress, so stats are subject to change, as is all the other battleships on this line right now. So things could change before this eventually goes live. Again, another example of having the 12-kilometer range when it comes to the Russian battleships. That is, outside 12 kilometers, Russians have what's called, quote unquote, by the Russian or by the devs, a worse battleship dispersion, although this one isn't really that bad. And then inside 12 kilometers, you get cruiser level dispersion, which is the example of right here. Now here we are in the training room with the PV, and of course we're going to show you an example of with the dispersion and without the dispersion. Again, 12 kilometers is when you get that buff. So we have these wonderful Pensacoolas lined up at all varying distances, but since the farthest one is outside of the angle, or outside of the buff range, we will then shoot at him first, just to show you what this looks like without the dispersion. And as you can see, it's mediocre. It's all right. This is kind of what I would call a normal Tier 5 battleship. And of course, it's still a battleship, so you can get those big citadels. I would put that as kind of a normal Tier 5 salvo. Maybe a little bit here and there, since you only have the 8 shells compared to some of the other ones that have 10, but still very deadly, can be very deadly, regardless of with or without the buff. But again, we'll compare it to something that is within the range. So let's go to this 9.3. We'll get that Russian buff there. And as you can see, a little bit different on that dispersion, so even more deadly against those ships. So yeah, still very doable at long range without the buff, and then you add that buff to it. Of course, you will be deleting ships off the planet, and well, with every 30 seconds. Let's dive into the stats really quick on the ship, then we'll show some gameplay as well as my captain skills and modules I used throughout this video. But hit points, 51,100, that's actually pretty solid for this tier, and overall is going to be extremely competitive for the ship itself. Torpedo armament, or torpedo protection at 13%, armor up to 100 or 350 millimeters. Now the armor layout's actually pretty solid. Now I found the ship to be very tanky when it came to a lot of it, which I feel is a lot of the Russian battleship line. But once you showed your broadside, you did get annihilated. Now there was a time where I was a tad more angled than I thought against a New York, and it was able to punch down and give me a pretty, like an 18,000 salvo against the side. Now I don't know if somehow maybe the fore-end deck or something like that was a part of the problem here. I felt it to be very tanky, but I'm wondering if we will ever see weird citadels or weird kind of big hits through small areas like this. I don't know if they're just far enough it maybe plunged right through, maybe caught on that armor and bounced down. I don't know, but there was only one instance that when I was playing through that I took a massive hit at anything kind of angled. Other than that, it was extremely tanky. The main guns, 4 sets of 2, 356 millimeters, so the biggest of this tier, tied with several other tier 5 battleships, but a reload of 30 seconds, which means it's the fastest of this tier at that millimeter, which lets you actually up tier pretty well against tier 7s, tier 6s, and 7s with that bigger caliber shell at a relatively quick reload time. AP velocity, 823 meters per second. HE velocity, 731 meters per second. I never even fired a single salvo of HE when it came to the ship. I'm being 100% honest, because the AP was hitting so hard. Again, secondaries really aren't anything that the Russian line is going to write home about, but they are there, and if you are getting close, they will start lighting off. AA mods. Now, let's just go to the captain real quick before we dive into the AA. I am running, since I am in a quote-unquote test ship and a work-in-progress ship, I tend to get focused a tad more when it comes to CVs. And so I am running a bit more of an AA skill. So when we're looking at these AA values, it's with BFT and AFT. A very simple way to switch these off, or what I would, is again, the Russian line is going to have a bit more of a problem with survivability since it has a limited number of repairs. So Superintendent was what I would take over BFT, and probably AFT switching for fire prevention. The Russian line is going to be a bit away from the cookie cutter builds that you normally would have with a lot of battleships, so you're going to go a bit more into survivability, but this is the captain I'm running throughout this video. Extra marksmanship is fantastic. Adrenaline rush, of course, high alert, all these kind of things. Again, if you can pick up one of the Russian captains from the arsenal, definitely worth it. You'll get a buff on some of these, as well as preventive maintenance, extra marksmanship, and High alert if you want. It maybe can switch around some skills and drop them to give a bit of a boost for survivability. Now modules, again, in this, only the 3 slots, so we are taking that AA gun mod 1. So all the shells you are going to see are going to be without aiming system, so technically it could be a tad more accurate. But again, we're Russian battleships. We want to get within that 12-kilometer range. Outside of that, we expect our dispersion to be pretty crappy or inconsistent. And within that range, as long as we're within 12 kilometers, it doesn't really matter if we have this, because we're going to be shooting like a cruiser, basically. Again, we're taking a tad more of survivability main armament, and we're going to be taking the damage control system mod 1. And then, of course, the premium versions here. Again, I'm not taking superintendent, which I do highly recommend for this, because it will give you damage control party 2 and the repair party 2. Back to the stats though, AA was actually pretty decent for a tier 5. Although you're not going to be shooting out more ships than like a Congo or anything, you were definitely plinking some out of the sky. We didn't actually get attacked too much with this, but tier 4 planes tend to get picked on pretty easily. Maneuverability, one of the fastest battleships at this tier, 800 meters for the turning radius, almost 30 knots, as well as 11.5 second reload, or rudder shift, sorry. And then one of the stealthiest battleships of this tier, 11.9 kilometers, which again makes it pretty easy to up tier. One of the downsides though is it is one of the shortest range battleships at just under 16, but if you give a battleship that has technically the highest caliber shell at this tier, with one of the fastest reloads for that caliber at this tier, with one of the lowest detections at this tier, which is one of the most agile ships at this tier for battleships, maybe giving it too long of range would be too much. So you get some goods and bads with this. Again, I am going in this, I believe I'm using the AA flag as well. I think that's the only flag I'm using. Again, you tend to get targeted a tad more when you are using one of the work in progress ships. So that's the only flag I'm using throughout this entire go. But anyways, let's dive into some gameplay, show you how this thing plays, and then my thoughts on the ship itself. So here we are in game with the PV on my favorite map in the entire game, and which is something that is really nice for this ship because the range is pretty low, but when you're playing on very small maps that tier 5s tend to get on a consistent basis, it's something that works well with this ship not having a long range. But a pretty typical match for a tier 5, although tier 5 can get bottom tiered a lot. It's something that you will get on a consistent basis of pretty solid matchmaking, almost all tier 5s, which is kind of nice. So it's a good showing of what this ship is actually capable of. Again, DDs really aren't your biggest threat when it comes to this ship, because if there is a DD, it has to get within torp range, and if it's getting within torp range, you have your buff to accuracy. So it's fan-tiddly-astic. So 2 CVs, so something we're going to have to worry about there. But other than that, we get to go against some pretty strong battleships for this tier. Iron Duke, the Julius Caesar, as well as the Wyoming. But we are going to get to beat up on some cruisers and a good little mix of everything. So it kind of shows you a good balance of this ship altogether. Now, let's kind of talk about what the ship is doing on the entire line of what the ship is trying to do, and that is to get within that 12-kilometer buff. Remember, all Russian battleships currently, remember this is work in progress, but the Russian battleships get a buff to their accuracy within 12 kilometers. I'll put a link down below to the dev post from Reddit on this, and it's something that is making this line fairly unique. So it is a unique addition to this. We've never seen something like this. I guess the only thing we've really kind of seen this is, and here's a good example of something that pretty normal dispersion, but what the devs said is outside of 12 kilometers, you would get what would be considered bad battleship dispersion. But this one, I noticed that even outside of the 12-kilometer range, the dispersion was pretty normal for a tier 5 battleship. So there wasn't as bad as a drop-off as I've seen at other tiers. But if there's not that bad of a dispersion outside the 12 kilometers, just imagine what this thing can do on a consistent basis if you are within that 12-kilometer range. And one thing that's kind of insane about this 12-kilometer range and getting the quote-unquote cruiser level accuracy, as the dev calls it, is that you will spend a lot of your time within 12 kilometers of stuff on the lower tier maps and lower tier games. So that's a really nice part about this ship, but that's also something that raises a red flag to me as a content creator, and my thoughts for balancing is something that has a battleship, especially that has cruiser level dispersion at tier 5. This is something that is potentially going to be a little too strong. This tends to go, if you've seen my other videos on the Russian battleships, again, it's the biggest worry I have with these, is that 12-kilometer range, in my opinion, for that accuracy buff. may be a tad too high. So again, with this, especially in low tiers, it may even mean to be lower than the rest. Smaller maps, closer fights, lower range for everyone. And maybe it needs to even go down to 8 kilometers. My advice, and again, the Caesar is known for being pretty tanky, but this is something that you could do on a pretty consistent basis. That was only 6 kilometers. I'm thinking of the next salvo. But that's something that you need to be very careful about, because of low tiers especially, you're closer on basically every situation. And so if you are making something too accurate on a range that they're normally in, that is going to be a tad insane. So maybe the lower tiers, maybe the 5, 6, and 7, maybe the 5 and 6 especially, might need to go into, and there's a nice little salvo right there. Again, it's a broadside battleship, so it's bound to happen because you have those bigger caliber shells. But if you are going to be pretty reliant, or pretty reliably within those ranges, again, bouncing entire salvos, this is something that Russian battleships are fantastic at. Also, I just want to point out again, DDs need to be within your accuracy range to even fire a salvo. So I think we get our next salvo on this, on the DD. Use those fast turrets as well for battleships. And so here is the first, the second salvo, I guess, within that range. So just absolutely obliterates DDs. You will just make them cry if they get within range of you. But yeah, I think maybe there needs to be a tier-to-tier difference when it comes to the accuracy buff, because low tiers, it felt just way too much, because you spend so much of your time within that effective accuracy range. So maybe we will see an even shorter range when it comes to this. I think the overall range of those needs to be a tad lower, but especially for low tiers, I felt like I was within that range almost the entire time. So bailing away, again, one of the main things about the Russian line is you will be doing what I'm doing right here, and that is letting fires burn a long time, because you only have so many repairs. As you see, I'm already down to 3, so if I use another one. Now, the upside of these is you can get a really low cooldown when it comes to when you can repair again, but you only have so many. So, kind of interesting. We've seen it with the October Revolution, the premium tier 5, and I really already, if we have to. Oh, also shout out to Shadow STFU 066F. He says he likes the videos. He's in game, so GG's, my dude. Hope you're checking out this one. But again, even though this guy's pretty far away, kind of looks pretty far away on this map, not the Iron Duke, but the Königsberg, he's still within my effective range of having that extra buff. So this is why I feel like it's a tad much when it comes to having that cruiser level accuracy. I feel like it's a tad too much to have on these smaller maps. It's just going to be kind of unfair. Already, I mean, we've kind of just been going against 2 ships this entire game. Well, I guess this is the 3rd one, but we're already up to 53,000. And that's in a tier 5 battleship. So that's pretty dang good, and maybe a little too good too quick. So that's what I kind of see a lot with these. Now, I do like the idea of rewarding aggressive, skilled play, and having what these battleships are is having the weaknesses showing that broadside. I don't think we really get punished that much this game. But we do with a lot of other ships. Is Russian battleships are known for being able to tank bow in really well, angled really well. But if you are showing broadside, you will take big damage, not only from battleships but also cruisers. I think I was playing the tier 9, and I actually, and there we go. Sorry, buddy. So that's what you're gonna do a lot. I think there's one game that I had with either the 7 or the 6, and I think I went back to back salvos for destroyer kills because they were all within that effective range. Again, you're going to hear me repeat this, so I apologize to everyone who's watched a lot of my Russian battleship videos for this work in progress. This is the part that really bugs me with this entire line, is that 12-kilometer range. I just think it's way too much. I feel like giving that strength, especially in low tiers, and so this is even it excelled even more or multiplied on the severity, is this is way too much. That Wyoming is going to get cruiser level dispersion from a tier 5 battleship, which has the biggest caliber, fastest repair. So that's the kind of thing that's going to happen. So it's definitely a red flag for me. But overall, I even think the ship, even without the buff of accuracy, would still be one of the better battleships at this tier. Again, we're just going to go through all of these. The tier 5, some of the best armor at this tier, some of the most the highest agility at this tier, with the buff dispersion at this tier. As I say that, you got a mediocre salvo right there. Reload, highest caliber. I mean, this is a gnarly little package for a battleship, and definitely when you make a low tier battleship this accurate and this deadly, that is something you need to be very, very careful about, because this is where a lot of new players are playing. And if you make something a tad too strong, you may have some trouble. But again, we are going to push in and show the ship as itself. But already 100k, 9 minutes, and basically had no problem at all. I think, do I take a decent salvo here? I mean, 7k. Iron Duke has some pretty big shells too. Really, I've only had one situation where I wasn't broadside. Now you do, and I think, do I get punished here? Not so much, but and we're just gonna go upper armor belt right here, get that full pen damage. Nothing we can really do, but GG's to that, man. And if you are watching, hope you had a good rest of your games. Sorry I had to go against this ship, but again, how this ship is, it's insane. It's a good ship. It's very fun, but we have seen other ships like this at this tier, and you have to be very careful with giving a ship so much power at such a low tier. Very fast, there's no real downside to it, and you're punishing basically everything. So some balances I could see to this ship. I think leaving the armor is fine, maybe increasing the reload. It's the fastest, or tied for the fastest at the fastest reload at this tier for that caliber. Not the fastest reload, but for this caliber, the 356. So definitely something that needs to be kind of tweaked, so maybe making the reload a tad longer. And again, I feel like one of the main things for this entire line is to really focus on that buffing range. I feel like maybe in the slow tier, 5, maybe 6. I think 8 kilometers would be the best. 12 is way too far away. I mean, you guys have seen, I mean, that Langley on the other side of the map, halfway across the map, is almost within our range of that buff. So that's something that we need to just keep in mind and be very aware of what kind of power we're giving a single ship. But in the end, it's low tier. You get these kind of maps, you will just wipe the floor with them, and a good battleship at this tier is worth its weight in gold. So pretty nasty stats right there. 140, almost 143,000 damage, 68 target hits. We shot down a few planes, got a few kills, got some citadels, as well as just a nice little game. We just pushed in and kind of bullied the rest of it. But never were we worried about a Julius Caesar. Never were we worried about an Iron Duke. We weren't worried about a Wyoming. We almost dev struck the Wyoming. So definitely some red flags there. This ship is insanely good, and I think not only with the accuracy buff part of the ship in this line, I think we'll see maybe some other tweaks to this ship as well. Probably some reload nerfs. Probably going to be something, I would say 32, 33 seconds, something like that for this. Maybe even 34 on the higher end. But we will definitely see, I assume we will see something hit there. And then I think we will see some tweaks for this ship and for the line of the actual buff to the Russian dispersion, which again is at 12 kilometers. But anyways, guys, wanted to show you the PV again. I don't want to slaughter the name for you guys, so I apologize all my Russian viewers if I did slaughter it the first time I said there. But the tier 5 Russian tech tree ship, currently work in progress, so stats are subject to change. But anyways, guys, that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.